Aloha, and welcome back to Ninth Island RC. In part 1 of building the atomic MRT EVO, we covered up to step 13, which was building the transmission, installing the transmission as well as the motor mount onto the rear part of the carbon fiber plate, which I honestly don't even remember what they refer to it as, the rear chassis plate. Makes sense. And, as we saw, it is just super smooth, free spinning, just really nice. So, today, the plan is to cover from step 14 up to step 24. Step 24 ends with building and installing the steering links. I hopefully will make it up to at least step 23. 24 if I feel the video is not too long. So that is what we will be covering today in part 2 of this 3-part build series. But something I want to show you guys that I found on a main was this. This is from Webster Mods, and it is 3D printed. It's 2 pieces. And what this is a drainage tray for shocks and differentials. And it comes in a plastic bag like this. Although when you're actually using it, flip it over. It's got this really nice handle kind of on here. You can see that there. And you need something to hold on. And you just put it there. You just put your shocks or your differentials upside down. Oil your shock fluid, your shock oil, your differential fluid just drains right in. And it just makes it easy to pour out. Super easy. And when you're done, once you clean it, you can just flip it over. And it's nice and, I'm not going to say flat, but it doesn't have anything that's sticking out. So, obviously this does not apply to 1/28 scale, but just something I thought was really cool. Figured I would share with all of you. Anyone who does 1/10 scale and larger, obviously you got to rebuild your shocks, rebuild your differentials every so often. So, yeah, that's kind of a little cool thing came up with. But as for today, let's get on with the build. Okay, so in episode 1, we left off with step 13, having installed the bulkhead cover. And so for episode 2, we are going to start with installing the rear arms, step 14. And out of bag 7, we got those. So let me get these cut out and cleaned up. Alright, there we go. So it's all cleaned up. Something that everyone should have when building kits is the close edge cutters, or sprue cutters as they're sometimes called, and then also an X-Acto knife. Sprue cutters, because you just don't want to break pieces off or twist them off. You could end up removing excess plastic. And then, once you use the screw cutter, take an X-Acto knife, or if you have a surgical knife, then you can cut off the little nub that might be remain, scrape off any excess plastic to clean this up. All right, so there we have the left arm and the right arm. Or actually, take that back. I think I got these a little backwards. So, left arm and right arm. I had them upside down. So there we go. And then also going to need the ball ends. Gonna need 4 of the ball ends, or ball heads as they're calling them, and 4 shims, and 2 of the 1.2 by 4 millimeter screws. Those are going to be the droop screws. Okay, so once you have the droop screws in, what you're going to want to do is, I don't know if you can see the end of the screw coming out on the back side. Let's angle it upward there. Now you can see it a little better. So from this side, you're going to want to have the tip of that out 0.5 millimeters. And I know a lot of people, what they try and do is they try and use this side to measure that spacing. And honestly, it's not realistic. But that's what this is for at the end. So just put it way past what you need it. So if you can see, just stick it way out. And then just put it up against what you're trying to measure and push down. And you can see that right now it's 0.92. Now I purposely screwed them in too far. Instead of having to constantly pull the thing out and and remeasure it, this way you can actually just do it this way. And then just recheck again and keep rechecking until you get it to where it needs to be. Okay, so I know you can't see this close, but it took a while. They are finally even. They're actually, I got them down to 0.53 millimeters, so yeah, I'd say that's close enough for government work. I don't think they expect anyone to get it perfectly to 0.50. But do the best you can to get it to that point. So now let's get to installing the ball ends. And now, might as well keep that here. Now, before I install the ball ends, these little spacers or washers, shims, whatever you want to call them, because these are typically stamped, the edges are going to have one side that is going to be smooth and one side that's going to be sharp. And, both sides may actually be sharp, but one side is definitely going to be sharper than the other. And so what I always try and do is I try and put the sharper side to the outside. That way it's not cutting into the plastic or the metal, whatever it actually is. just to save, to increase longevity, I guess you could say, of the part. There's nothing that says you actually have to do this. It's just something that I personally choose to do. So now let me get the all these ball ends installed, and then we'll move on. Okay, so we got the ball ends into the lower rear suspension arms. And something I wanted to mention is, I don't know if you saw, there were quite a few shims in here. And so what I suspect is that they give you additional shims because once you do get this piece installed, you may discover that there is a little more space between the front and the rear F-mount. And so if there is any movement, then you may need to take these apart and add additional shims. It will also actually allow you to slightly adjust your wheelbase by doing it that way. But obviously the more important thing is that you don't want any front mirror movement. You want them pretty solid, but you still want them also free to rotate up and down. So check that later. In the meantime, we'll be moving on to step 15, which is installing the rear arms. And for that, we'll need 2 of the 2x4 screws. And these are the flathead. So that's not a flathead. That's a button head. And so the kit uses for the rear toe mount, I believe it's a 0. Okay, it's actually a 3 dot. Yep, it's a 3 dot. So what that means is that the stock piece, the 3 dot, is going to give you 3 degrees of toe in. And if that's too much or too little, because I do have, I believe, 1, 2, 3, and I think 4, I'm not positive. I prefer a little bit less on the toe in, so what I did was upgraded, got the upgrade the UP05, which is the rear toe mount 2 dot for 2 degrees. So let's get this installed, and then we will see how much, if any, play we have. And when you go to install this, you're going to want the dots facing up, and then, I don't know if you can see, but you can see the little pins sticking up. So you want those pins to stick down. There are 2 little holes in the chassis in between the screw holes, and that is going to be for those pins to sit in. And there you go. So just to test this, I'm going to just install, well, actually, should probably install both, but not going to use Loctite at this point in time. And that is because you want to make sure that, as previously mentioned, that there is no play and there does not seem to be any play in these. And this one is pretty good. This one, not so good. So if you have any stiffness like that, I mean, this one, it's moving pretty freely. It's not, falling under its own weight, but there is no binding, there's no stiffness. It does move very freely. This one, on the other hand, is definitely stiff. So what needs to do is to work it back and forth until it's loosened up a little bit. Okay, that might not actually be the problem. So next step in troubleshooting this one is going to be to remove it and possibly tighten the ball ends. Okay, so as you can see now, this is moving just as free as this one is. And what I ended up doing was I used a little trick that I was taught by somebody else that actually has to do with the plastic rod ends. But when you get a rod end that is too tight onto a ball end, you pop it on, and you can actually use some needle nose pliers, either this way or this way, and squeezing it gently multiple times from every angle possible. Either perfectly perpendicular this way, this way, this way, and you keep doing that until it loosens up. What you're doing is when you're compressing plastic against the ball end, you're actually causing the plastic in the end to expand. So that ends up loosening it up just like that. So now both sides are equally loose. So we are good to go on that. And then moving over to the rear drive shafts, gonna grab bag 8 and I'm going to just pour everything out because I really don't know what's gonna actually be used on this one yet. Now, what I do know is that we'll not be using the rear uprights. As I mentioned in my unboxing video, they are Atomic is working on basically renumbering, I guess you could say, parts, because these uprights are the exact same uprights as used on another vehicle, and so they gave me these to test and try on this. So should be good. So we'll need the 2 CVDs. Gonna need the 2 uprights, not those ones. I'm going to need 2 of these brass shims. Put that one to the side. 2 of the ball heads, and 2 of these 3x4.5 by 1 millimeter shims. Gonna put those to the side for right now. And like most of the bags in this kit, they do give you some extras. So the brass shims, you've got extras there. You've got extras here of the 1 millimeter shims. You've got extras of the ball heads. And then out of bag 3, gonna need 4 of the flanged bearings. 1, 2. Actually, no. Not going to need any because the uprights actually already have the flanged bearings installed. So right now, don't need any bearings. And then we will need 4 of these shims to start. These are the 3x5 by 0.1, and you may need more of these later, so keep these out off to the side. These are going to be needed for adjusting the play of the drive shafts moving in and out. So to start, Just going to put 2 on each side. And again, as I mentioned earlier, what I like to do is I like to find out which side is the sharper side. Now in this case, because there are going to be 2 of them, I'm going to put the sharper side facing outward on the first one. And then on the second one, I'll put the sharper side facing inward. And any additional shims that may get added, those will also be facing inward. Okay, something quick that I just noticed is that whereas the rear uprights that come with the MRT EVO have a single hole, the uprights that I have 2 holes, and since I'm not sure which is which, I actually need to check. And so it does look like it's the inner hole, the hole closer to the chassis, so that's where we will put them for now. And there we are, the rear CVDs, uprights, ball ends, step 16 is complete. And now we move over to step 17. So we're going to take the other 2 ball ends. And these are the ones that have the shorter legs. The ones with longer legs went in to the uprights because of the brass shims. These don't use any shims. And these are going also on the inner. As you notice, this one, the gear cover also has 2 holes. So you already had some adjustability with that, but now with the aluminum uprights, you actually have 4 different adjustable settings that you can do. And I'm going to need 1 of the 2 brass screws, or 3, they actually give you 3. Actually going to need 2. So, and out of bag 4, going to need the 2 1.5 by 11 millimeter pins. Okay, CVD fill out, that's okay, don't worry about that. So basically just get your uprights in, and then the 2 brass screws, and these are going to be using the Phillips, and that will screw into the bottom of the rear upright, and that will hold the pin in place. So once you get it a little bit started, that's when you want to center the pin as much as possible, and then tighten. Once you've tightened it, push the pin just to make sure, and obviously it's not tight enough. So something that you might want to consider doing, and I probably should have done this the first time, is don't install the CVDs into the rear uprights yet. And just install the suspension arms first. Once you get those installed, then you can deal with installing the CVDs. As you can see, this way is actually going to be a lot easier. Okay, installed. And just like testing the suspension arms to make sure that they are free moving, you also want to test the uprights to make sure that they are also free moving. So once you see that both are completely free moving, then you are ready to move on to installing CVDs into the uprights. Okay, now it's time to build the rear links, upper suspension arms, whatever you want. So you're going to need 4 of the rod ends. This is something they didn't give extras of. So there are 4 of the large, and there's 1 small. Obviously, the small one is not the correct one. It is the large ones. And as you can see, you're going to need to trim 3.5 millimeter ball cap end. And so if you look at these, you'll notice that there is a slight indentation. Trying to get the camera to focus. But there is a slight indentation at the end of it, so it actually kind of guides you exactly where you need to cut it. You can use an X-Acto knife. Since I prefer to try and make it as straight as possible, I will use the sprue cutters. And it's also kind of nice because you can just put it over the end and slide it down to where that indentation part is. And it's a nice clean cut. Okay, now that you've got those cut, and I know one is a little off angle-wise, but not going to worry about it. So what I'll do is I will use 2 definitely good ones, and I will build this one. Once I have that 1 millimeter gap that it shows, then I will measure the end to end, and then I'll match this one to that. That'll definitely make it easier. So what I like to do when I'm building turnbuckles like this is, knowing what the gap is, I like to measure the entire length. So it's basically 5 millimeters. Knowing there's a 1 millimeter gap, so I will screw in 2 millimeters, which means that I should have 3 millimeters outside. So that is how I will determine how much to screw this one in. Same way that we measured how far the droop screws were sticking out, I will use that exact same method to measure how much of this is sticking out. Okay, so can't get it exactly 1 millimeter, and the reason is because it threads through the whole thing. The one reason I don't like, turnbuckles, this is technically not a turnbuckle. It's more of a really long rub screw, but the reason I don't like using these for links is because there is no way to actually get them to a perfect length. When you have ones where the opposite ends are counter rotating, then those you can actually always get to exactly what you need. These, you're going to just have to get the best approximation. So in this case, it says 1 millimeter gap, and I've literally got 1.11 and 0.9 on the other. So it's probably 1 millimeter. So there we go. So that's going to be the best we can get for that. Now, to do this one, because one piece accidentally got cut a little bit shorter, this is where I will take the whole link and measure it, and I get 17.14. So that is what I'm going to try and achieve with this one. And and 17.18. So we're talking literally 0.04 millimeter difference. That's, like I said, that's going to be the best we can get. So now we can pop these on. And it doesn't matter whether you do the outer link first or the inner. I just chose to do the outer for my own whatever reason, but they don't really need to be inner first, outer first. Doesn't make any difference. And as you can see, these are definitely free moving. So that shows that also that stiffness that had been on this side, on the front left side, it is completely gone because this is totally free moving now. As are the bearings. And now what I'm doing here is I'm rotating these so that I can, if there's enough shims for it to be seated correctly. And looking at how deep the CVDs are seated, I don't think there's going to be any need to add more shims. So that looks about as perfect as that's going to actually get. So at that point, we have finally finished the rear end. Now we're going to move on to the front. And for that, we will need to start by obviously getting the front chassis plate. And we will need the front bulkhead, which should be in bag 9. There's the front bulkhead and the upper arm mount. Now again, we won't be using the upper arm mount, but I'm just going to pull it out so that you can just take a look at it. And then there is, if I can get this tiny, tiny part out. No, let's just dump these all out. There's also this little tiny piece. And they're calling this the caster stage. So what I assume is that it's probably slightly beveled. I know if I tried to show you in the camera, you know, there's no, I can't even see it. I really can't. You can't, but what it does have is, if you look at the instructions, it's going to show you down here the caster stage. So you can either set your caster to 0, 1, 2, or 3 degrees, depending on how you insert the caster stage. Now, if you look at the caster stage itself, you're going to see on one side, I don't know if you can see this, but you can see the 2 indented dots far apart. And if we flip it over, you should be able to see 2 indented dots slightly closer together. So those will determine what degree angle it is. On top of that, the front and the rear has a little, so one end on the side that has the 2 indents, on one end it has a long slot, and on the other end it has 2 little divots. So that will show you how, you know, what your angle is going to be. You actually, if you flip it over to the wide side, there's going to be one end that has 1 divot. So decide whether you want your, you know, what you want your caster angle to be, whether you want it no caster, 1, 2, or 3 degrees. I'm going to go with the 2 degree caster. So what I need to do is I need to have the side that's closer together, upright, and I need to have the end that has the wide divot in the front and the 2 dots in the rear. And actually, I take back what I just said. I'm looking at this. So this is actually the front. Sorry, you can see. So this is actually the front. This is the rear. So for 2, I need the closer side. I need the 2 divots towards the front. So this is the front, and here's the closer side. That is the 2 divots. So what I'm going to do is, this is really hard to position. Honestly, I've never seen any caster angle adjustments like this. It's definitely unique. Now, as for the upper arm mount, like I said, we are not going to be using the plastic piece. So I'm just going to throw that back in the bag, because what we do have is the aluminum upper arm mount, and it includes additional pins, screws. They are probably the exact same length as what was included in the kit, but we'll use the ones that were included here anyways. So now we need to find the 2 flathead 2x18. Extremely easy to find because they are the 2 longest screws in the bill. So what I'm going to have to do is we'll go through these 2 holes here. We don't want to lose that piece that we already put in. I think it's easier to get the front end in at an angle and then push down. And holding that piece in, now we can piece is going to go upright like that, but what I'm trying to figure out is which end goes forward. And I can see, now I understand the whole divot. So as you can see there, the bottom of this actually has a pin, and the pin will coincide with those divots, and that's what determines your angle. Okay. Alrighty, so I'm actually not screwing into metal. And I would have noticed that using a couple of 2mm X nuts. Now these are plastic, so I'm going to be right back. I'm going to see if I actually have any aluminum M2. Okay, lo and behold, Reflex Racing, part RX 525. And obviously others make them too. But these should work perfectly. Now, the whole reason that I prefer using aluminum nuts, or in this case, nylock nuts, over the plastic ones, is that they will lock. You don't have to worry about stripping them. They will definitely hold. And you want to tighten going back and forth just a little bit at a time until it doesn't turn anymore. And there you go. So that is step 19. The front bulkhead assembly is finished. Now we move over to servo. Horn is in bag 10. And this is a 2-piece design that actually relies on the servo horn of way, this carbon fiber top plate is an interesting item because it kind of serves as a top brace for the servo mount, but in a way it's also kind of a servo saver. Not entirely, but in a way, because it will prevent the servo horn from going too far to the left or to the right. So it kind of helps save the servo, but not, I don't think that's its actual primary purpose. So next up is going to be step 22, installing the front upper and lower arms. Okay, suspension arms are kind of installed, don't have the screws yet. Basically, if they were a little, especially the bottoms were a little difficult to get on, and the reason is that the plastic here that the pins go through is tight, and it's purposely tight so that it will hold the pin won't fall out. I mean, technically, nothing else needs to be actually right here to hold those pins in. They will stay on their own. It's just shoving these pins. So the pins are 1.5 millimeter. I suspect that the holes are like 1.4, 1.3, purposefully so that it will hold them in place. The top ones, on the other hand, they slide in pretty freely, which is why they will need screws here to hold them in place. But in the meantime, so these droop screws for the front, this is where you would adjust them. Second half of step 22 is showing you to adjust the droop screws to make the lower arms horizontal. Okay, so there the lower arms are perfectly in alignment to each other. One thing to remember with 1/28 scale is that small changes have big increases. It's unlike 1/8, 1/10, where small changes have small adjustments. moving on to step 23. And we are not going to be using the stock plastic knuckles. We will be using the aluminum ones. Upgrade part UP02. So going to put the front knuckles together, step 23. So for this, going to need 4 of the 4mm ball heads and 2 of the 3mm ball heads. So okay, there you have it. Now, I don't know if you noticed that, I used pliers to snap these together. I tried to do the first one without, but it didn't work out very well. And the second thing was that One of the nice things about this using all-wheel drive wheels, even though it's a two-wheel drive, is that I was able to use needle nose pliers to put the screws in, to tighten it, to hold it really nice and tight, which made it super easy. So there we have the front assembled. These move nice and free. Next up will be step 24, which is going to be assembling the steering links and installing those, and that will be the final step for today. Okay, sorry, I had to take a break. Honestly, these were the hardest links I have ever had to put together. I don't know what it was. The grub screws or set screws that went into the first part I had no problem with, but trying to get the second piece on was a serious pain. So, yeah, I had to take a short break and such. Now, notice something in the manual too, that it shows them, the rod ends, as parallel to each other, even when it shows it installing it. But obviously, being that they're 90 degrees, and you can see this one is installed, it is not parallel. So, it took a lot to get those properly done, but they are, to the best that I know, the correct lengths. They are equal. Going to have to test and see how the steering length is. All right, so there you have it. It's essentially complete. So we're going to stop here. Ending with steps 24, the installation of the building and installation of the steering links. Until next time, mahalo.